All right, welcome to No Better Time. I'm Phil Salter, and I'm joined today with Betsy Jorgensen. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Oh yeah, so happy to have you. I know we've been kind of going back and forth for like a week or two now, and not super long, but I'm just really excited that we're doing this and that
Same.
you're giving me some of your weekend.
I hope you're giving me easy questions, Phil.
Oh, they're gonna be hardballs. It's like you're gonna get into all the political issues. Just kidding. No, but Betsy is someone who's just so awesome. In fact, her husband Max is my workout buddy, and we go all the time to the gym. So something I've always appreciated about you and Max is as soon as you guys moved into the neighborhood, like what? How long has it been? three
2 years
years?
now, a little over 2 years.
Like how long were you here before you guys really started reaching out and started being
Well, I
social?
remember it was just a couple weeks in. We had like a neighborhood little barbecue. Of course, had we moved in just a year ago, that wouldn't have been possible. But so luckily, we moved in a couple
That's
years
true.
ago before the world of COVID, and I remember having neighborhood barbecue on the driveway and getting to know a lot of people that way, and it just snowballed from there. And now we're all just hanging out all the time.
Yeah, it's great. In fact, I had an episode a couple like last week, the week before. I talked about how hard it can be to make friends as an adult and the value that has, not just socially, but even just like in your career. You just kind of learn
Oh
new
yeah.
things, even if it's not like, hey, this person got me a job. You just learn things and it helps you in your whole life in so many areas.
Yep.
Is this something you guys had always done in the past, or was it scary to reach out to all these people you
It
don't
was
know?
a little scary. No, we have not always done this in the past. We've always been somewhat like transient wherever we've lived. So we got married in Utah. We moved to Arizona following some stuff for Max. He was getting trained to be a motorcycle mechanic. So we went to Arizona and we knew it was short term. So something about knowing you're not in a place for very long makes it hard to want to plant roots.
Mm-hmm.
Could if I was to do it over again, I would still make the effort. But we lived in Arizona briefly. Then we had a 1 year internship for him in Milwaukee. Meanwhile, I'm working remote through all of this, but we're in Milwaukee, and we knew it was another just 1 year internship. So once again, we didn't go out of our way to make any friendships. And then we moved back to Utah. But again, we were in a rental, and something about being in a rental in our minds was like, well, we're not here permanently either, so
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to go out of our way and invest in the people around us, which is a giant mistake. So when we bought
Yeah.
our house, we made a very, very intentional effort to get to know the neighborhood. I mean, you and everybody else, right? People were going to be around for a long time, hopefully, and a lot of the time. So it was different for us, a little scary for us, but it's paid off. So
Oh, for sure. And it's funny because had a very similar situation where we lived in different apartments and places, and then at a certain point we get a house, and you're like, oh, this feels different. And you're right. So it could be a mistake to not still try to make those connections, but it seems like you can get this attitude of like, no one's reaching out to me, I'm not
yep,
reaching out to them.
yep.
And it's probably more in our heads than anything. I don't think anybody actually writes us off, but we kind of feel that way sometimes.
Hmm.
But so much value in making those connections, and that was a huge example I brought up is you guys coming to the neighborhood and starting these barbecues and making me realize, oh, you really can like live that American dream and have your neighbors be your friends and spend Fourth of July, except for in
Right.
2020, together.
Well, you see, like the King of the Hill, where it's the guys all just hanging out on the sidewalk talking all the time, and I love that because it's just the neighborhood. We're always just out together on our lawn chairs. The kids are running around
Yes,
talking, and
particularly 2 summers ago, like 2 falls ago, like 2019, the kids would get on their like what are those like battery powered cars, just going.
yes,
There's a cul-de-sac and just going in circles, and we're all sitting on lawn chairs chatting. It was great.
I love
Um,
it.
but one thing I want to ask you, Betsy, is something I've been trying to ask, and I don't always do it. But like, what was your relationship to money? Because the premise of my podcast is
Hmm.
I'm trying to like stop being afraid to learn more about finances and
Yeah.
investing and preparing for the future, and also having a more awesome present. Like I can build
Hmm.
wealth now. I don't have to wait till I retire. But I look back at my childhood and what money was like to me, and it was, not what I would have wanted it to be, but it was what it was. But how about you? What was money like? Did you get an allowance? Did you earn money?
Uh,
Did you save money?
Inconsistently, no, never saved. It wasn't something we talked about as a family, so there wasn't like a very open learning environment. I remember as a teenager, my mom just gave me we had $100 a month. It was our clothing allowance. And I remember we had like church dances all the time. And so I'd always use my clothing allowance to get a cute new outfit to impress the cute boy, the church dance. And so honestly, I haven't learned too much about we didn't learn too much about money. And it was just something we didn't really talk about. So I went to college and I had to set up a bank account for the first time. Had no money to put in said bank account, had to get my first job. I never really had the pressure to get a job either growing up because my parents paid for all my things, right? I
Mm-hmm.
did really competitive soccer, and that was, now the older I get, the more I appreciate how much money they spent on the things I was interested in as a kid.
Yeah.
Um, but my, wanted to go to the movies, my mom would give me a 20. So there wasn't a, if you want to do this, you need to earn that.
Mm.
Which back then, of course, appreciated. And now I'm realizing maybe some tougher love would have been good because, to start me off on like a, learning more about, if you want things, you have to earn things. And
Yeah,
that's,
I think that's interesting because I think even them giving you money to buy clothes, it goes way beyond what a lot of parents do. I think, which is really cool because I'm sure there were times you realized you blew it all on maybe a pair of shoes or one
yes.
outfit, and you're like, oh, now that's
Yeah,
gone.
definitely still some money lessons that,
Yeah, so that's
to figure
good,
out how do you, and ever, so I always got the 100, like this was just probably from ages 12 to, there was like probably 4 years or $100 a month I got to spend on whatever I want. But essentially it was clothing,
Yes.
and my mom did not like going clothing shopping with us. So it was kind of like, all right, go to the mall with your friends back when that was a thing. So yeah, how far can you stretch the $100 every month? You could get the
Yeah.
really nice Abercrombie shirt so you can feel really cool, but there goes like half your money. And
Yeah.
so still definitely some money lessons,
Which
but
is good, and it's just kind of I kind of have this attitude of we're gonna learn that we have to earn money at some point, and I
mhm,
think the most valuable lesson is how to manage the money if we have it. So I think a lot of times we focus so much on like can't just give my kid an allowance; they have to earn it. It's like, well, yeah, there's value there, but I think just giving them some money to say, hey, like learn some lessons with this, and also
yep.
figure it out.
There's value in both, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then let's
You're
say your
learning different
parents
things.
just gave you 20 if you want to go to the theater, which is good. But that could have also been like, hey, money just I don't really need to worry about it because it'll
Mhm.
come. But also, it could be value there where it's like a feeling of potential abundance. Like money is
Yeah.
not such a thing that is so lacking. Like, hey, it's there. I may
Mm.
have to learn how to get it, but it's out there, So
Right.
that really
Yep.
interesting, very cool.
Mhm.
Um, and so, as far as you, what's I think is really awesome with your family is you are the primary financial earner in your home. You
Mhm.
both have ways of making money, obviously, but you're the full time worker. How is
Yeah.
that for you guys? How has that
Yeah,
been?
and it wasn't, I mean, it kind of was always that way to a degree. So when we were, moving around following Max, his dream of becoming a motorcycle mechanic, I was working remotely for Honeywell at the time, moved to Arizona, got that job, um, put him through school, we helped, paid off his loans from his program, and then we moved around, and he had his internship. We moved back to Utah, and he stayed at that job for a couple of years. But once you start having kids, you look at
Mm,
your money very differently. So we had our first, and we both still worked. So she went to daycare. Um, no regrets with that because we met some really great people. But once we had our son, we had to stop and just look at the budget realistically and say, all right, well, putting two kids in daycare is the equivalent of one of your paychecks. So is it worth working, a full month to only take home half of that, adding in the stress of drop off, pick up? And so we just looked at it from a variety of factors, like quality of life. We didn't like the stress of like, who's picking the kids up today? And
hmm
one of us always was like late picking up Harland, and it was stressful. And um, so we were like, okay, we're gonna take that out. So we still would have been net positive money if we had kept Max in his role at the dealership, but the stress wasn't worth it. So we looked at it and decided that he would stay home as soon as we had our second. So he's been doing that for 2.5 years now. Just a month ago, he picked up a little part-time job for some fun money. So honestly, for his motorcycle, if we're being honest here. So, but it's been good. I think it's not totally rare, but you don't see it a lot. Maybe it's more in, I don't know if it's just in our area or just in general, but it's definitely like a mind, you have to, it's like a flip. You have to switch a little bit because I get, all the doctor's appointments, both of our phone numbers are on there for the kids, but they always call me instead of Max. There's a lot of things that, and I'm like, hey, I'm working right now. Can you call my husband? So that less so with money, but more just kind of moving people's assumptions about some
mm.
simple things. And
Culturally speaking, you mean, right?
yeah, we're not
Yeah.
offended by those things, but and sometimes that does play into money, of course, too. Like as a woman, I'm very aware of the fact that I might be less inclined or less bold about asking for a raise or doing certain things, but I'm the primary breadwinner in our home and I have a responsibility to do my best to bring in income that will provide for our family. Kind of, as you said, short term, fun money, long term planning, right? We got to think about it in both ways. So lots of cultural things to get over. Definitely, for our kids, it's kind of fun to flip the switch a little bit. And, but yeah, it's been good. I love to work, and he's definitely the patient one in the relationship too. So that was another factor that made more sense
Well,
with
yeah, it's
the age
awesome,
of
and
kids.
why not, right? So it's like if you look at culturally speaking, there's things where there's assumptions made, and
Mhm,
someone would just assume, oh, if one person's going to work, I guess it's the husband. Okay, just because that's socially the I don't even know if norm's a word, but just kind of like the
that's kind of the way
majority
it's
of it's
historically been,
you could say
right?
more common, I guess is
Mhm,
the word. But it's like you guys, it's so common also for both people in a relationship to be working, and there
right.
might come a time where you say, okay, is this worth it? All the expenses around this, and like you said, hey, maybe we're a net positive, but quality of life is super important, and stress and just the time and all the
Mhm,
energy. So it's like if I'm doing all this to make this much at the end of the day, not worth it. Because if that
right,
was your actual salary, you'd say I'm not taking that job, you
right.
know. But and you decide what makes the most sense for our family and
Mhm.
who's on a certain path for you. It sounds like you were really liking the path you were on in your career, and it
Yeah,
made sense.
and
Like I
and
want to keep going.
and we also saw, um, his role kinda had hit more of like a plateau, right? So, at a dealership, there's only so many roles you can move into,
Mm,
um, and even the more tenured people weren't making that much more than Max already was, and at that time, I was already making more than Max was, and I still saw a lot of room to move up, right? And have since probably about doubled what I was making when we made that decision. Um, but so we kind of also we're looking at the potential. Like, and Max
yeah.
loved that job, so it was hard, but he also had to work every single Saturday. He worked till 7 most weekdays, and so it just wasn't really conducive to having 2 kids either in that sense. So,
Yeah, so it's like that, but also like, hey, what are
mhm,
the future options here? Okay, there's these two
yeah,
things, and it's interesting that you also mentioned like there's things that you might feel like, for instance, asking for raises. It's like
mhm,
you might feel a little more like maybe less aggressive about
yeah,
that, but that I feel the same way. I get nervous around that, so it's kind of funny. We also make these assumptions that like, hey, men are
right,
this way, women are that way. Well, maybe, but
right.
also it could
There's
be
people
totally
there's people
opposite.
everywhere, and I know a
Yeah,
ton of women who are just like the boldest of the bold, but,
yeah.
oh,
And
for
then
sure.
and obviously there's cultural ramifications, unfortunately, for some women when they act a certain way, and it's not
Mhm,
taken as it should be, which is ridiculous. But
mhm,
it's just kind of interesting because I think sometimes I found myself painting myself into a corner, assuming this is just how I am.
yeah,
It's like I'm not technical. Well, now I'm a software engineer, so I guess I am technical. I just didn't think I was, you know.
mhm.
So that's really cool. So and then as far as you've worked for like large companies with a
Yeah, so I
cultural culture and like potentially politics involved.
yeah, my first role was at Honeywell, giant company. It was I guess that's my second role, but I don't really like to talk about my first role because it was just not fun. Anyways, let's just say I'll just say just I had 2 coworkers who hated each other so much, and back then I worked at a little art gallery, and my office was the 2 square feet of desk next to the copy machine in the back room. That's where I worked, and the 2 other workers just hated each other's guts. So they would um, print something, not that they actually needed to print anything, just as an excuse to come into the copy room and talk to me about the other one. So then I started develop
Oh.
like that, is it the Pavlovian response, like with the bell? Like I would hear the copy machine and I'd run to the bathroom to like hide.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I remember a month down the line, one of my coworkers came up to me very concerned that I had a medical issue. So anyways, just to like paint how much I hated that job. So took the first job I could get, which was as an internal communication specialist at Honeywell. So very big company. It was about 130,000 employees at the time. Um, and then was there for about 3 years. Went to Workfront, which is a local company here in Silicon Slopes. That was about 1,000 when we got recently acquired by Adobe. So now I work at Adobe, another bigger company, about 25,000 people. Um, and definitely there's politics just on different scales at all the companies. So
Mhm.
it's just kind of a fun thing to navigate. And I'm learning, some about my shortcomings is, where I'm not being bold or confident, or even as a manager, where I've got a lot of work to do. And so, yes, definitely familiar with kind of small company, big company,
And would you
medium.
say that, like, from your perspective, as you've looked around, would you say that being a woman is had positive results or sometimes negative.
Yeah,
Um,
you know, and I'm sure it's like anything where you see kind of both, right?
mm-hmm,
Like I've had bad work experiences um with men, right? And I've
mm-hmm.
I've had comments made, or I have a boss I won't name, but a somewhat recent boss. We used to make comments about my hair a lot. So this is kind of a tangent off the finance. This we're off the financial train, but
It's
um
all related, I think, in my mind.
yeah, the work environment though. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had a boss who would say things like, you know, on a day that I would be wearing my hair kind of naturally curly, she would say something like, you know, just a hypothetical story. Or actually, she kind of would tell hypothetical stories and then real stories. But she was telling me this story about somebody that she used to work with who started to straighten her hair and wear it in slick back ponytails. And what do you know? Within like a month, that woman was promoted. Like,
Hmm.
just like these weird stories that weren't super relevant, and but essentially was her trying to say, I don't like your hair.
It's like a passive aggressive kind of way to like say
Or
maybe be more professional or something.
yeah, it was like her talking about my hair. She didn't like my hair naturally wavy and down, and so she would make comments and tell me these stories about other women who started doing certain things and they would get promoted, and it's like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, that um, there's so much that goes into getting promoted. It's not about straightening your hair.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
just comments like that, or bad experience, so there's differences, and I'm sure everyone feels differences, and but those are some of the kind of things.
yeah. And obviously, I don't want to like narrow you down to like, hey, you're a
Mhm.
woman who works. It's like you're an awesome employee at a company, and you've found opportunities to be in more and more managerial roles and have a team under
Mhm.
you, and
Mhm.
like that might have been kind of scary at first. Like, did
Yes.
you ever thought like
Very
they
scary.
trust me to have people like to be under me? Yeah.
Yeah, it was like not long after I joined Workfront that I got a team. I suddenly had a person on my team. They're like, "You're overloaded, and we have this person who we think could help you." And so they transferred somebody from another team to my team, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." So I'm like 4 years into my career now. I'm a people manager. I have no clue what to do with this person. Now I manage two people, and I work with contractors, which is a very new thing for me to support contractors as well. But definitely like a deer in the headlights moment, but also something. Okay, I'm just rewinding a little bit, thinking about experiences I've had. Um, I remember when we were at Workfront, we had like not too long into my time at Workfront, they were doing like a pay parity exercise, and like they're analyzing people with similar skill sets in the same roles, looking at data pay trends across gender.
Like at
Um,
various companies or whatever.
yeah, so like at
Yeah.
Workfront, I remember they had to do a ton of corrections for a bunch of women who were doing the same jobs as men at Workfront. And whether it be through just, I mean, I'm sure it was like none of these were intentional decisions, or maybe people negotiated less in the offer process. I don't know. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how it got to this point, but there were people with, significant pay differences. And that's the whole point of a pay parity exercise. And even Adobe does it annually to just say, hey, looking at gender, do we have people doing the same role, same responsibilities, but are we seeing any patterns in women making less than men? And they do an annual correction. It's a very small amount of employees that get corrected at Adobe, is
Mm-hmm.
my understanding. I'm new to the process, but I
Yeah.
remember at Workfront, we went through that for our first time. And that was eye opening to me that really existed, that people were making, whatever sums different than people doing the exact same job as them. So I think
Yeah.
it's really cool that companies now are making a much more intentional and transparent effort to make some of those corrections.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, that was the first time I was like, oh, that's real. I hadn't really realized it for myself until I saw, some of the data, and, about people, and heard the stories like, oh, I got X increase because I learned that my coworker's making that much more than me. And it's just like, that was kind of my first eye opening moment. Just
But and think
somebody's,
about it, that's kind of as far as I understand, like a newer thing to actually start considering these things. And
yeah.
this has been a thing, a potential a problem for a long time. And it's not just women; it's minorities. It could be
Hmm.
people with certain sexual orientations, whatever biases people have, even if it's not intentional, even if it's
Hmm.
subconscious. This whole idea of like, oh well, he's got a family at home, so he needs more money,
Hmm.
and it's assumption like, well, the wife, she's working,
She's
but
probably
like
secondary
she has a
income, and right,
husband,
that
and like it's like that, which should not at
right,
all be a consideration for
and that might
any.
be like a super underlying current of thought,
Just,
right?
just a minute.
Um,
I'll be right up. Okay. Sorry.
no, you're
That's my
fine.
boy.
I miss you, Finn. Um, and again, it's not. I mean, it would be incredibly rare that something like that would ever be intentional, right?
Oh,
And a
for
lot of it's
sure.
like also, hey, let's say this person doesn't negotiate, right? You're like, oh, I'm getting a candidate for 30K less than my budget. No complaints here, right? Like,
Yeah, and of course you ask questions like, why isn't someone feel empowered to negotiate? It could be from a
mhm,
systemic like experience or whatever. But
right.
yeah, for sure. Like I think, but what's really awesome is in a world where sometimes it can be scary to admit you've made a mistake, to correct things, because you could say,
Mhm,
what if I just hope no one notices? Because
yep,
sometimes saying, oops, look at this mistake I made, could have its own repercussions. So to be able to say, let's correct this, is really a very
mhm.
awesome thing. um, Very cool. I think, so as a manager, has there been things you've had to like learn, financially speaking? Like, do you have budgets where you say, "Hey, we have a
Mhm.
team activity, or we have marketing, or things you have to kind of do
Yeah, a little
either
bit.
outward facing or
Yeah.
maybe internally budgets?" I don't know.
Yeah, so my work is all internal employee facing communication. Um, yeah, I've it's funny, budgets and as a communications person are always tricky. So my budget is usually, I pull from usually somebody else's budget, but I do have, line items that belong to me every year. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I've learned about negotiating on software contracts. So I remember when we brought on an intranet vendor, which is the private internet portal for your employees, right? So we had an employee intranet. That was one of my first jobs at Workfront, was to build an employee intranet. And I remember negotiating with the vendor and negotiating. My boss was helping me at the time, and negotiating is not really the right word, because I remember it was like they gave us a number and we were like, cool, and we just did it, right? Like, I had never negotiated for software before. I assumed my boss had done it a bunch, right? Um, and I don't know if he had either. Um, and so then I remember a couple of years later, we were like, you know what, we actually maybe want to look at a different vendor. This one's not meeting our needs. And I learned so much about how much you can move the dollar sign on like a software contract negotiation. It was insane. I mean, I'm talking like we went from like 100K to 50K just
Wow.
with the right conversations.
Because if you don't know better, you're like, this is just what it is. It's
Yeah,
like you
this is
used to
just
go into
what
the
it costs.
store. You don't go up to Target and say, "How about you give me this for half the price?" That's just not going
Yeah.
to happen.
And then you take it, it's almost like it's like almost like job offers, right? Where you get an offer and you take it back to your employer, right? So for us, we got this offer, we took it back to our current vendor, they met it, but then we decided we still wanted to switch, but we got this great price, and kind of did some back and forth, and you
Do you
were
ever like feel like a certain feeling? I don't know if guilt around
like
things
guilt.
like that. Because I do. Because I would hate the idea of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm leveraging this
Well, that's why
opportunity
the
to
procurement
strong
people
arm this,
the
right?
procurement team is good at what they do.
Uh
That's
huh.
their whole job, is to be like, emotion gone, pull it out of the equation. This is a business transaction, and we know you can go lower, and the business is ultimately not going to offer you less than they could afford to make, offer
Exactly.
you. So it's worth trying. So we
Yeah.
saved a ton of money the second time around, and again, that was another like
Eye opening.
money related for me, as
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't have a ton of budget. Like I was saying, I have a few line items. Intranet was always one of my annual line items. I get small budget for like team building and that kind of stuff. So that was like big moment for me. And then even probably shouldn't go into too much detail on this, but just looking at my employee salaries, right? And like,
Mm-hmm.
how can I advocate for them as their manager to get those to where I think those should be? Or, those are things I've had to do in the past. And um but yeah, lots of money lessons that you don't realize you're going to get in your job outside of thinking about the money you take home, like your
Yeah,
pay,
yeah, for
right?
sure.
It's
And
the
it seems like the
budgeting.
higher you go, the more that comes into play, I'm sure.
Yeah, and even advocating for your own salary, and
Mm-hmm.
even just kind of some of that corporate financial literacy, which I had never had before, but learning about pay bands. So like, for example, I'm leveled at a certain level in my job at Adobe, and it was the same at Workfront, and I think most big companies have pay bands, right? So it's okay, Betsy's making X dollars, um and the range that she should make at this manager 30 level role or whatever it is, right? Is, I'm going to use like round numbers for simplicity. I'll do
Sure.
millions. So, you know, so let's say the range could be from 1 million to $2 million. The midpoint, is that $1.5 million. Betsy's a little bit below median. So those pay ranges come into play too when you're doing like annual conversations, or even just an employee feeling like empowered enough to say, hey, can we talk more about my salary band and where I fit in that? Like, I feel like that should be a conversation they should be allowed to have, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, am I below the median in what people in my level are typically like getting, right? So, learning how to advocate for yourself financially, it comes down to just understanding a little bit how the back end works. And having sat in my communications role at Workfront, sat in a people department, and actually it does again at Adobe, but at Workfront, because it was so much smaller, my peers were head of compensation, head of HR. So I just got so much exposure to how do we manage pay conversations and annual merit increases, and we're using this contracted third party consulting firm who designs all of our pay bands, and just learning more about all of that was just, and it's information I'm going to use, and I've already started using to advocate for my employees that I manage, and for myself even, like, hey, where do I sit in the pay band, and can we have a conversation about maybe why I'm below the median when I think I'm performing above average. And so there's just a ton of that I've learned
Yeah.
sitting
And
in a
oh,
people
sorry.
department.
Yeah, yeah. So it
No.
seems like kind of being able to, the more you understand the process, and it obviously will
Mhm.
vary, but probably understanding what's happening at the company you're at now. There may be variations in other companies, but that's going to it's not going to be all
Mhm.
together different. And understanding like what comes at play and like what kind of things are
Yeah.
considered, and understanding what is my value, because that can
Yeah.
be
So,
hard.
and when you're getting a new job too. So like I
Mm-hmm.
also head of recruiting at Workfront was one of my peers. So learning more about the recruiting process and how much wiggle room they actually do have in the back end. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and just like anything, sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But learning like, okay. And so I actually had a job offer in the middle of all the integration, and I ended up ultimately turning it down, but it was for like $15,000 more than I was making, and honestly still am making. So, some days I'm like,
Mm.
but then I remember, okay, it's not just about the money. And that was the reason that would have been a good decision. But there are about 100 other reasons why staying where I was and moving forward with the Adobe integration was a much, much better decision. Right. Um, but I use some of the skills that I, knew in the back, and I'm like, okay, I know they have flexibility on this, so I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
push for that. And if I had never known that, I wouldn't have pushed for that. So I ended up getting an offer that was pretty good. They were still a company that didn't have very forward thinking benefits, right? It was a very standard, time off, standard, lots of things that at both Adobe and Workfront I was spoiled to have unlimited PTO and this and that, or better maternity leave, and so many other factors that go into it. And that's another thing too, is salaried is not everything. Like,
Oh,
this
for
job
sure.
would have been $15,000 more a year, but it would have reduced quality of life for me in a lot of other ways.
But
uh,
also financially speaking, like depending on the actual benefits package, it's really important
oh
to actually
yeah.
work the numbers. Like, what is their 401k match, and how
Hmm.
much vacation do they actually give in? What is that actually worth in dollars? And
Oh yeah.
there's other things like, do they contribute to my HSA? There's like, or how much
Yes.
or how much? And it's just, you don't always get this stuff up front, but like, how much does my premium actually cost for my
And that's stuff that
insurance?
you can ask for up front, though, that people don't often. They're like,
Yeah,
this
like
is
if you
the
don't, they may not
surface
just give it to
level.
you, but if you ask for it, yeah,
They
what
will.
is the
Yep.
premiums, and like what are the what am I looking for, like the deductible, and like what will it
Yep.
cost? Like if I had a baby, oh, if I'm at Adobe, it costs me 2,000. If I'm at this other place, it'd be 8,000. Okay, that's important if I'm having a baby this next year or
Yeah,
two.
and that
You know.
honestly, that was part of what helped me make my decision on this company too, is I was like, I need to see your benefits guide, and they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
send me the benefits guide until they're like, and that's when I knew I was like in a final 2, 3 candidate. And some
Mm-hmm.
companies will send it to you at that point and some won't. They're like, we won't send it to you unless we offer you. So then they offered me, and I said, okay, now I need to see your benefits guide. And
Mm-hmm.
I just was looking through it, and it was just very old school. And I was used to very entrepreneurial, startup-y, kind of more flexible, work, flexible PTO, whereas this was
Yeah.
your butt is in the seat from 8 to 5.
Mm.
You get 10 days of PTO. After 2 years, you're going to be at 11. After 4 years, you'll be at 12. Like, I learned a lot of stuff that I was like, that's not worth the $15,000 annual income
Yeah, for sure. Like you
at
said,
all.
even if like the money ended up being, you went up ahead, but yeah, that's not the quality of life you want.
Mhm.
These are all things really anyone can learn. Is value to anybody as
Yeah.
you're looking for opportunities or to negotiate within your
Yeah,
current
but sometimes you
company.
just don't know what you don't know, right? So, like,
Yeah.
even, like, pay bands, that was a newer concept to me as of a couple of years ago, and learning about when you get slotted into a role, there's at most companies, assuming they have some sort of process for this, but
Hmm.
you're sitting within a pay band, like, there's a minimum and a maximum, and so,
Within
like,
like for your role, you're
yeah, so
saying?
let's
Oh,
say
okay.
when my role was excuse me. So let's say my role, the range was 1 to 2 million, okay? Obviously not. But let's say I was sitting at 2, the conversation is then, does she need to be leveled up? Like, because if let's say I wanted more money, they're like, "Okay, we're paying you
Mm,
the max we should pay for somebody at your level." So then their questions start to be with your manager. Okay, how do I get to the next level, right? And it's not that you have to get to the max before you level up, but sometimes that is what forces that kind of
yeah,
conversation.
that's a good point. Like, and those are good conversations, and it's important. Like, a lot of us have, reviews either annually or sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, maybe quarterly with
Mhm.
our management. Talk about like where you're at, and don't be afraid to point out where you've grown, and
Yeah.
actually talk about where you're at before, so you can compare it. And it's okay to like not really brag, but you want to show all the
Oh,
things
for
you've
sure.
done, and then come up with a plan with your manager of like, what's do I want to become, and what.
Bragging about yourself is it's something that we're taught our whole lives not really to do, right? It's
Yes.
like you're vain. You're just taught your whole life subconsciously, sometimes more directly, not to be not to brag.
Yeah.
Um, but it's actually a critical skill when you're in your career. It is to brag on yourself, and obviously in the right time, in the right place, and in the right way. It's a skill that I struggle with big time.
Oh, I
Right?
I agree. Like, it's so much easier for me to like be self-deprecating and point out like where I screw up because it makes
Yes,
me
and
feel
then just
like.
assume someone's gonna be like, "No, you're
Yeah,
awesome. You're
exactly. And in
doing
some ways, it's a way
great."
to like, yeah, to ask for validation, which I really try not to do that as much as I used to.
Mm,
But what I was going to say though is go to your manager and find out, is there like a formal like definition of these different levels? And like
yes.
I've learned like, okay, I'm a software engineer. Okay,
Yep.
there's a junior, there's like a
Mhm.
mid, there's a senior, there's a team lead, there's like management. There's different levels, and it's like, what is the definition of being a
Yes.
senior? And where are some places that you see? Oh, if you level this up here in your skill set, you then could be qualified as defined as this senior role.
And actually,
Things
I
like
was
that.
using something exactly like that recently was able to get my one of my employees leveled up
Mm.
because I was able to point to the language they created and say, "She's doing all of those things."
Oh, she was already there. But you
Yeah.
could all conversely, you could have said, "Hey, look here. This is what you need."
Mhm.
Like if you're not there
Yep.
yet, it's like having a specific goal to work towards is so key.
Yeah. A lot
So
of this is just stuff that it took me a few years to learn, but if somebody at the outset of their career was like handed like, "All right, let's do a little deep dive into pay bands. Let's do a deep dive into exactly what you said, like what is leveling and how do they define the levels and where do you sit and what skills do you need to get?" Like it's a much clearer roadmap than just like hoping that you're doing the stuff that's going to move you to the next level.
yeah,
Getting like, hey, no, I'm mapping to this, and this is the company's definition. So let's have a conversation about why I'm not at this level or
yeah, and we should
how I
treat
can get there.
our careers just like we treat like if let's say you
Hmm.
want to have goals with like you're investing or creating a business. So it's like let's take these seriously, and even if it doesn't lead to us staying at that company, or maybe it leads us to skills that we go build our own company, whatever. But we
Right.
should always take these things seriously with goals in mind, because like why spend like such a huge part of your life, doing something if you're not doing it as productive and effectively as possible,
Yep.
right? Because
Yep.
it's time away from our family. It's gonna affect what we can do with our families if we can make more money and
Yep.
things like that. So yeah, it's really
Hmm.
awesome. I really appreciate the time you've taken. It's really cool. Like I was telling you before, like I don't know where these conversations will go. I have an idea of what I want to talk about,
Hmm.
but like this has been really
Well, this is fun too
informative.
because it's reminding me that my sister, who's more junior in her kind of career, can
Yeah.
honestly use. I mean, I am not sure I've talked to her much about all of these different things that she could be using to advocate for herself. So it's kind of fun to think, okay, now I need to go talk the talk and share this information with my sister and the people in my life that could benefit from
Yes.
learning how to
This
negotiate for
this is what you do,
themselves.
Betsy. You say, okay, here's the podcast. You need to
Yes, let's
subscribe. You need to
subscribe.
go to YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You gotta
There you go. Look at
There's a
this.
button on the anchor.fm site, anchor.fm/no better time, that you could even like support financially this podcast. I mean, come on, people, let's do this.
Woo! And one thing that this is like surfacing for me too is sometimes other people make us feel guilty about wanting more money. So like for
Mm,
example, my sister just got like an internal move in her company. I'm so excited for her because it came with a $10,000 raise, a
ooh.
role that she's a little bit more excited about. Um, but even just that $10,000 raise, I remember I was telling my mom, it's so great. Stephanie's got this new job and she applied for this internal role. And funny enough, she's going to be doing internal communications like me. So,
Oh, that's
you
nice.
know,
She's got a
so
mentor.
fun. um, so she moved to this internal communications role at her company. That's kind of a new role. But yeah, $10,000 raise. And I remember they actually came back to her and it was about a $6,000. Like the offer was for about $6,000 more than she made, but they made the mistake of telling her that their budget was, X. So they told
Ah.
me that. And I was like, no, 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 no. They told you the budget's this. They like you. Obviously, they offered you the job. You already have some internal street cred, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I was telling my mom, I was like, oh, yeah. So I told Stephanie to tell them that she wanted this much. My mom was like, oh my gosh. She shook her head and was like, it was like she thought it was like this greedy, like, Stephanie,
Was
no
this
one
before
can.
she was successful, or was it like?
I was telling her the story. So it
Oh,
had
like she'd
already
already
worked
gotten
out.
the higher, but I was
She
saying
was,
I could see like that fear of like, oh no, you've maybe screwed it up. You have that fear
yeah.
sometimes, like if I ask for this, they're just gonna
Yes,
say
it was a
forget
little
it.
bit of that, and I think
Yeah,
that's also too, like, from our parents, a
yeah,
more conservative, like, you just take what you're offered, you take what you're given,
yeah.
don't be
Like it was a feeling
greedy.
of ungratitude or
Yeah,
something.
and
Like,
but she said, "Hey, can I have this instead?" It was for, like, $4,000 more than they offered and still $5,000 less than they had said the range included, um,
yeah, which is a
for
smart
their
move.
budget. So $10,000 increase for her overall, and it took them like an hour to just get her a new offer letter. They're like, yeah, of course. It was an hour. She
Mm-hmm.
was just that brave and asked one question, and her salary increased by $4,000.
Per
It was like
year.
per year,
Exactly.
right?
It's not like
Like,
a even if it was a one-time $4,000 thing, but no, this is
yeah,
per year,
this
every
is per
month.
year, and then her next job builds off of the salary of this job. So like that
Exactly.
is a different. That's that small conversation she had. Just anyways, a
But no, and
tangent, but I think
yeah,
that says a lot of different things in one
yes.
story
And you
when you
start to realize like any amount of money you get more, like just kind of compounds because it like you
does.
make more, but then the next job, and it gives you more power to say, no, I don't want that opportunity because you don't have to take
Yeah,
every
this is
opportunity
what
that
I'm.
comes to
This is
you.
what I'm worth.
Yeah, I'm worth this
Yeah,
much more. Like I'm happy. Like if you want me, you're gonna have to pay
mhm.
me maybe 30,000 more. Who knows? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
oh yeah.
whatever. So awesome. But once again,
Anyways,
Betsy, thanks so much for your time
thanks.
and for
Well,
your input.
mhm.
If anybody has questions that I could redirect to Betsy or in
Yes,
general about finances or kind of going up the corporate ladder and managing people, you can email me at nobettertime.podcast@gmail.com. I could forward those on to Betsy and see what she has to say. Do my best to answer them myself. Also, if you have topic suggestions, things you'd like to hear about, I'd love to hear that too. Have a great day, and thanks so much. And don't be afraid to recognize your greatness and
yeah.
point it out to those
Ask for
that
that money.
and ask for that money.
Worst that happens is they say no.
All right, bye.